folks hear me okay? Excellent. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me on an early Wednesday morning, the morning after the big party. My name is Ray Deck. I'm the founder of a company called State Change. And I've been working on this question of what remains hard about no-code, low-code, and developing some models around how to make the hard things go a bit easier. I can talk more about what we do at State Change in a bit, but what I'd really like to do today is talk a bit about the lessons that we've learned to create a mental model built around 4 principles that I find helps one crack through the hard parts of no-code. And I think it's worth noting that there are hard parts to no-code. That a lot of the tool vendors, and I know there are some tool vendors in the room right now, often are promising that no-code is going to make things a lot easier. It makes a lot of things a lot easier. But often what happens is we are removing a lot of concerns, and then there are a few that remain. And if you were to sort of do a distribution of the whole project, there's always some part of it that's going to be harder than the others. And often we find that like a bunch of things that we don't need to worry about get removed, but few things are still there. And those few things can become the majority of the time and the money that we spend on these projects. And so my focus is how can we understand what those things are, and how can we break through them to once again radically reduce the cost of no-code and the speed at which we can develop both the internal and the external tools and applications and utilities and automations and things that we can create that create economic value for our businesses and for our clients. So the way I'm going to approach this session is asking you for a lot of feedback. I want to find out what's hard for you about no-code. And as we understand those things, we'll be able to make better judgments as to how to apply these models to actually solve the problems you have in the room. And I'm hoping you might be able to make some progress today. If you want to follow along on this Miro board that we have right here, if you just point your camera up at the QR code, you can tag along with it. And there's a link on that page to also, and Miro requires you to log in for this part, but you can also post comments on it. And I'd love to be seeing what you have to say about it. So this presentation today is not one that I've created and that I'm giving to you. This is one that we're going to be creating together and that you are going to be giving to the rest of the no-code community. A little bit about me and sort of how I came into this. I was originally trained as what we would now call a data scientist, but we didn't really call it back then. I worked with some really good people who trained me to think quantitatively, and then I got sucked into building software startups. And one of the things about like being a developer versus being more of a CTO type is a developer develops software, works with the machines. But what I had to do as a CTO and a leader of software companies is actually grow the people. And I find that the highest form of that role turns into one that looks more like a teacher. So what we do at State Change is try to reapply that model that I've done through building several software companies to help people be able to think more like a senior developer. And the mental models we're going to be discussing today are really at the baseline of all that, to the point where after I gave this version of this talk for the first time a few months ago, we start actually referencing these models even by number when we're doing them in our office hours. And so I hope that you'll be able to find it useful today. And since we've started doing this over at State Change, this is going to be the brag slide. I've the people who've interacted with it have found it to be exceptionally helpful. And some of these things are sort of maybe ascribed to me, but it's really about the model and the pattern, right? Of looking at not just as a how do you solve just this individual problem, but how do you think through the problem? How do you start to think like a technologist or think like a product creator? And that shift in the way that we think is what I found to be the most important for us to be able to make the progress that really makes a difference. Also, I'd like to just point out that like one of the most recent reviews I got was that, hey, doing this on Zoom was nice, but really it'd be nice if we did this in real life and with croissants. I apologize. I thought that there would also be breakfast here in addition to the coffee, so I hope while we have coffee and tea that we can have the croissants another time. So this is going to be the part where we start creating the presentation together. And the question of like, what is hard for you, and what have you observed to be challenging, or maybe even that's sticking you today about your projects? And I'm hoping that we can, and Jerome, if I can enlist you, sir, Get some feedback from the room and some thoughts on what you have found to be challenging, either specifically today or sort of more broadly. Can we get the microphone?
I'll be your loveliest.
And I would appreciate a volunteer. Jack, please.
Hey, Ray. It's not really a technical problem.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
A little closer, cool. Not really a technical problem per se, but the challenge of documentation when the rate of change in the solution is so high. Documentation often feels like the slowest step. Choosing when and how and where and what to document is a challenge.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent point. And that's an excellent point, too. It's not just about things that are purely technical. Please, in the back of the room. Yeah.
One challenge for me has been when I think about a functionality and I want to do it a certain way, but it seems like the logic of the software doesn't work that way. So it's the roadblock that I've encountered many times.
The tool is blocking me. Absolutely. This comes up a lot. Others? Yeah, please.
Yeah, hello. For me, the biggest problem is.
Could you hold up the microphones? Just close to your mouth.
Of course.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks. For me, the biggest problem is optimization. We have a lot of wishes, and when we connect it like external databases, and we really want to that our software will work really fast.
Performance.
Yep.
Absolutely. Over at the end here.
Cheers. For me, it's more version control, but then in its totality at no code. So no code is like awesome if you work with like one person. You don't all do it by yourself. But I'm like currently leading like a bigger team with like 2 full-time no coders and a QA tester. So we do have the time to go faster, but we actually wanted to scale bigger.
Yes.
But we didn't because just it would be inefficient, and having 3 or 4 people would be exactly the same as 2, because you're just constantly fixing merge issues.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Over here, a gentleman in the back. Cor, could you give it to him, and then we'll go to you, sir? First, the gentleman in the back, and then you, sir.
Hi. Sometimes it can be hard to achieve a design because based on how the components are built, it might be just harder to do what we want.
Yes, design fidelity. Please, sir.
And also in context, because when I write it in my context.
Yes.
What happens when I don't have that context and the app should still be running? And of course, then you have other developers.
Yep. Context shift. Definitely a problem. George?
Logging and oversight is a big one for me.
Sorry, which?
Logging and oversight, so being able to monitor things that are going on when they're going on, particularly things in the background, cron jobs, that sort of thing.
Observability, logging, monitoring. Whoa, hey, look at that. We're getting big. Yes?
Mine's pretty much in the same vein, which is no code makes things very easy, but it also obfuscates a lot because it does a lot of things themselves. And if things go wrong, it's a lot of the times very hard. For sure, if you're on the nitty-gritty of things, finding out what exactly is going wrong is a big issue. Like figuring out like why is this going wrong, and you're at a level where we're just doing it this way, and we don't have any more information as to why it is going wrong. Yeah, levels of abstraction indeed. Yeah.
Exactly. Excellent point. Anything else? Sir from the room? This is a fantastic list.
And one more, Ray, if you want.
Sorry?
So I've got one more, Ray, if you want.
Oh yeah, go for
Security.
it. Security. Was just talking about that on office hours last night. It's one of those. it's hard, right? Right, how do you, the promise of these tools is trying to make things easy for you, but then you discover that there's a certain level of precision that you require, right? It's like, how do you make it so that you can be collaborating with your teammates? You were able to go fast at the beginning, and then it's like, but in order for this to work, we need to have 5 people working on it instead of 1. And how do you deal with that on the teamwork side? You have the issue of, I was able to make my design, but how do I combine design with issues of interactivity and issues of state management and issues of automation? And like the automation really gets to issues of context shifting as well, right? Where, hey, I created something in this environment and that makes a lot of sense to me. This links back to the documentation thing, and these all things come together. What I find is an overall pattern here is one of intersectionality. When you have a problem with the one tool, you have, as an old boss of mine used to say, a throat to choke. You have you can go talk to the vendor, right? This thing, the product itself doesn't work. But often the challenges that we run into aren't that the product isn't working, it's that we're trying to get to the intersect of what we want to have happen in the world, what the tool is making happen, and usually the fact that we have to compose multiple things together in order to make our stuff work. And we think this stuff should just work, but now we're in a mode of not being a consumer, where we're going to use software as it was handed to us, but we're creators. And we're creating something that has never before existed in the world. And the sense of entitlement that we get when we're using no code is that we should be able to make this. But I saw a shift of people who were born in, say, the 1970s, probably my generation. They would say things like, there's an app for that, and they'd be excited about that. But people who were born maybe 10 years after I was, and then further on, I think this is true for a lot of people in this room, they look and they say, there should be an app for that. And then they look at these tools and they say, I can make an app for that. And I find that just be an extraordinary mindset shift in the created by the world of no-code. But that means that, like, as a result of becoming a creator instead of a consumer, you're now responsible for more of the concerns of how you're going to make these things work. So I have found that, in many ways, it's a very simple model, and we can get more into the details of it. But I find these 4 things are the things we keep on talking about in state change office hours, and that get applied in specific cases for how we solve the hardest 5% of problems. Most things you don't need to worry about that much, you might not need to think about that much, but when you need to step back and think, I find these 4 things are important. To maintain a beginner's mind, we'll talk about what that means in a minute. To be curious, I call it the Ted Lasso rule, we'll discuss that in a minute too. To continuously shift left, which is about shipping things sooner in the life cycle of the project. And finally, having a bias towards motion. Because one of the things about these projects is that rather than being sequential, and hey, we're going to learn how to do a thing, then we're going to do a thing, and then we're going to ship a thing, all 3 are happening at the same time. And that is one of the great promises of using these tools, that we can shorten the cycle between the idea we have and shipping for the first time, which then leads to learning from the shipping, and then building, and then shipping, and then turning that wheel so that we're getting the market insight and being able to solve problems much, much, much faster. By the way, I should put out a bias here. I do not have a hard attachment to no code and saying that we should have 0 lines of code. My approach is that the virtue of no code is speed, and that the people in this room are going to be capable of building. That's my North Star. So we'll find this brings in some code, this brings in some methodologies, this brings in use of visual development, which is what a lot of these no-code platforms do. But it's really trying to find the right tool for the job. Okay. So let's talk about the first one. And the idea behind a beginner's mind is that we are at the start of a journey and that we will be smarter tomorrow than we are today. And that we don't have the answers yet. I find this to be really important really in any technical exercise, because we will learn from the machine and from the project how it needs to work. And more importantly, we're going to learn from the market when we actually get things into their hands. And I think the first part of that that's really key is the idea that you're going to build this again. 10 years ago, if you were building software, you were probably much more concerned about building version 2 or building an iteration, because you put so much work and so much time and so much money into building the first version of the product. The virtue of the tools, of the tooling that we have today, is that we can build the first version a lot faster, and that educates us and tells us how to build the second version. And that means when we build it the second time, we are not the same person we were when we built it the first time, because we're much smarter. I sometimes say that like the things we build are both the software and ourselves in terms of the skill sets that we're creating. And so if we start with the idea that it's okay for us to build again, it all becomes, I find, much easier for us to be able to make use of the tools and say, wait, this doesn't have to be perfect or just so or what have you. We're going to try to get it far. This is sort of when we talk about MVPs. I think that's an important principle. And then what can we do to add to it, after that? If you don't mind my asking, what is the attitude that you all take when you're sort of breaking into a new project, which is doing things you haven't really done before? Like when you're coming at it as a beginner and you're like, I know I need to learn a bunch of stuff and I'm trying to figure out what's next. How do you usually approach it? Jack? I'm sorry, Jack, can we just pass you the microphone so the folks can hear you?
Very similar concept to beginner's mind, which is one of first principles. If it's a domain in which I've not worked previously, then I'm going to look at whatever the kind of academic foundations are for it, rather than, I don't know, corollary implementations or existing solutions. I'm going to kind of want to take it back to the foundations of what I'm not familiar with. And typically my approach is like read a book about it or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Anything else people sort of take when they're first starting that you found to be helpful in that regard? Oh, yeah. Core.
I was just asking others.
Asking others, yeah. And which actually brings to another one we'll be talking about when we're talking about being curious. I think there's another piece of this that I find to be really important, which is shipping knowledge, and that kind of relates to your idea of like the book reading and what have you. And there's a difference between shipping what you're going to give to your customer and shipping that which is going to allow you to do the thing that comes next. And the idea of building small experiments that help build your knowledge both in terms of technical as well as what the market has to say. We bring this up a lot in office hours because it's this whole thing doesn't seem to work when we're trying to make this particular feature work in the context of the whole complicated product we're trying to do. So I sometimes talk about using a white room approach. And for those of you who haven't heard that term before, it's an engineering term, relates to reverse engineering, where instead of trying to work on this feature in the context of everything all at the same time, say, no, let's just work on this feature by itself. With the expectation that the thing that we have built, I'm just going to relay this out for a second, with the expectation that the thing you just built as you're testing for that feature isn't the thing you're going to ship to the customer, but is developing the knowledge that you can then bring back into the rest of the complicated project. And I find all of that only works if you also give yourself, frankly, forgiveness. When I talk to people who are most frustrated with their projects, they are people who are frustrated that, like, one, the tool doesn't work, but they're also quite angry with themselves at, wait, I should be shipping this faster. I should be getting this out the door. I need to get this out the door now. The next thing I do needs to be about shipping the thing. But I find you can go faster if you're willing to be patient with yourself. Learn the small thing, ship the small thing, and then integrate the stuff back in. But the Navy SEALs in the U.S. have a saying. I don't know if it's completely unique to them, but I learned it as slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. What I think slow is smooth really means is do things one step at a time. And when you're willing to do that, and when you're willing to say, I'm going to make this one thing work, and then bring in the rest, that I have found really cracks open a lot of things. And so, like, when people are working on those kinds of problems in, say, state change, we will often talk about using a white room and using the idea of let's just focus in on this one problem, because it's not about focusing in on it for days or weeks. It's really going to be a matter of hours, maybe even minutes. But if you focus in on the one thing and ship that knowledge, I find that allows us to grow and then also allows us to create the products or automations or integrations or whatever it is you're trying to make that allows you to create economic value. So we were alluding a little bit to the idea of bringing new information into this, and I think that's a really important idea for being curious. Now, when I make the Ted Lasso reference to being curious, do people know what I'm talking about? Okay. So has anyone here seen Ted Lasso, the Apple show? Okay. For those who haven't seen it, it's about a super, super good-natured U.S. football coach who gets snookered into doing English football. And but at one point, he's the one who's doing the snookering in darts. And he hustles a guy in darts, and right before he's about to win, he gives a little speech, and he talks about the importance of people underestimating him, and that he used to find that very frustrating. And that what he would discover is that he saw this quote that he ascribes to Walt Whitman, which says to be curious and not judgmental. Jim Rohn, who is a sales trainer, has a sort of a parallel line. He says, whenever you find a disappointment, the best thing to say to yourself is, that's interesting. Not being as eloquent as Mr. Rohn, my reaction, when I'm at my best and running into something that's frustrating in that regard, my reaction is, huh. And that for me is the Ted Lasso rule. The idea that when we run into something that isn't quite working, this is an opportunity for us to discover and for us to learn things about that we didn't previously know. And in order for us to learn, we need to go outside ourselves. And so this can be challenging, particularly if you're like positioned as being the expert on X in your organization, to say, wait, I don't know something that can be a little bit threatening to that. But when you're willing to go and be curious and go get the information from somewhere else, you can make a lot of progress. And actually, I think this applies even more to the world of no-code. Because in the world of no-code, I find it's really important to have what I call a shopper's mindset. I appreciate there are a couple of vendors in the room who have both been the beneficiaries and victims of the shopper's mindset. That you're trying to find the right tool for the job. Because if you were writing a program, you're going to do it all in like C++, say 25 years ago, or running Python more recently, or JavaScript, what have you, you're basically working with clay, right? And you're shaping it into exactly what you mean to do, but you're responsible for the whole thing. The cool thing about a lot of these no-code tools is you're trying to find things that get you most of the way there, right? But the thing that got you there for the last project isn't necessarily what will get you there for this project. And so I find it's really important, actually it's a really useful thing about going over to that exhibitor hall, to discover what tools are available to you that then you can bring to bear when it's right for that given context. It's not like, oh, I'm a Bubble expert, and I'm going to do everything in Bubble, or I'm a Xano expert, I'm going to do everything in Xano. It's like, when you look at your project, and this is something that can change over time. This can change because the project changes. This can change because the tools themselves are changing. And finally, this can change because you're changing, right? Because your own technical aptitude, where you create greatest value, where you focus your attention, where you are basically what allows you to be great evolves over time. And the question of which tool is then going to help amplify that greatness in the context of whatever project you're working on will also change over time. So I find that to be an important thing, particularly in the world of no-code, that's maybe different from the way that I've seen it in code previously, where it's like, previously it was like, how do you just make this thing work? How do you make the machine do it? Now it's, how can I get someone else to make it do it for me? And that allows us to move a lot faster in this universe. Another aspect I think is important is being willing to, ask others. I think we had alluded to that a little bit before, being willing to talk to a colleague, being willing to get help on a forum. These are the kinds of things that expose us a little bit because we thought we were supposed to be presented as the experts. But I have gotten such value. I'm a person who sometimes gets presented as someone who knows a lot about, a lot of things. but I only have the expertise that I have because I've been willing to ask others. And I feel like I'm a continuous novice in that regard. Now, I will talk, I bet I could talk to any person in this room and learn something really valuable that I didn't already know. And I hope I get to talk to as many as possible in the course of today. But when you ask others, you're able to get a lot more value from that. And certainly that's the model that we have over at State Change, right? We do that with the office hours. But one of the things that for those who have been in the office hours know, I don't answer all the questions. I will invite other people to give their wisdom. And when I do, I learn too. It's not just like, oh, wait, I'm sort of being the junior version of Ray or what have you. No, 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 no. I get their expertise brought to the table. And Bailey, I've called on you before when we've done that in office hours recently, or a bit ago. Other things that are relatively obvious is learning how to Google. Google is a wonderful resource, but it starts to get limited value when we're dealing with no-code tools. And I'm sure we've all felt this frustration. Like, how do I do X with Xano? How do I do Y with Bubble? How do I do Z with what have you? And you find that actually there are a lot of answers on something called Stack Overflow for how you do something technical, and they're always giving you gosh darn code, right? It's not telling you how to do it within the tool. Which also then leads you to being willing to accept code. There's nothing more moral about doing things through a visual development system as opposed to using code. The question is, what's going to help you move faster? And this, I think, is even more true. Starting about 11 months ago, November of 2022, I went from having 0% of state change questions being about code to about maybe 1 in 3. I didn't understand why this was happening. Was it getting like a different set of people, like more? I mean, I work a lot with, also, professional developers and what have you, but that hadn't really been what state change was, right? I mostly worked with low-code, no-code people. Why were they bringing all these code questions? Because when they were asking the question, how do I do X? They were asking ChatGPT, and ChatGPT, one of the things that like these AIs know how to do really well is write code. And I think as we pay attention, like what's happening in this world of accelerated development, which I think is the broader universe that we sort of no-code fits into, we're going to find that these tools that are able to create code using completely different modalities than the visual structures that we associate with a lot of things we use today are all become important. And I've been seeing people use them on a regular basis. In fact, can I just quickly ask, how many people here have used ChatGPT to generate code for them? Yeah, okay, I don't need to belabor this point. Now, this also leads to something else, though, which is a related phenomenon, which I'll just make an extension of ChatGPT. I'm going to call it, how many people have had the experience where ChatGPT generates code for you and it doesn't work? Yeah, but it almost works. And that is also the promise of no-code, of the no-code tools you're using today. They get you almost there. And being able to compose these things together is going to be part of how we're able to create even more acceleration, particularly for things that were previously really hard in the world of the development of the things we're trying to create. Now, I've actually been doing a lot of chatting here. I would like to just sort of open up. What other resources have you all found to be helpful, right, to be getting information that is external to your brain to be able to solve your problems? Any candidates or stories that anyone be willing to share with me? Ma'am, please. Cor, right here in the back. Thank you.
During my no-code training, I've found out that there is a dimension of having a logical thinking.
Yes.
That we are not taught in school, in France, at least. And so I had to use Brilliant to to acquire this logical thinking.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So, I think one of the things that you'll find as you get more advanced into this stuff, and thank you so much for bringing up that point, is that the most valuable resources that you use are going to be the ones that help you think a certain way. And I find there are two kinds of thinking that are really important. One, to your point about logic, is machine thinking, right? Trying to basically create a version of the machine in your head. Because if you can sort of imagine how the machine is thinking and what it wants to do, it becomes a lot easier for us to start to figure out how to communicate with it, to coax it into doing those things. But if you don't have an idea of how the machine works, well, that's a lot harder, right? So your point about logic and logic training is really a good one. A second version of that is going to be what I would call product thinking. And one of the very neat things about no-code developers is they don't necessarily know it, but they're actually doing what Marty Kagan would call product management. And product management is what he calls at the intersect of three things. It's about engineering, right? And that's what sort of the technical part of no-code. It's about design, and we've all talked a little bit about design today. And it's about where the market is and understanding where the customers are. So there's excellent theoretical work out there on how to be thinking more like a machine, the logical training. You use Brilliant for that? Right. I'm going to put that up here. As well as you get more into it, there are going to be some other books, and if people want to follow up with me afterwards, I'm glad to talk about some of them, that give you a better idea of how machines like to think. There's works by gentlemen like Bob Martin, Clean Code, what have you. Anti-patterns is another good one, just to help you think the way the machine works. But also being able to think about product management and how you can put something in the hands of the customer, which allows you to integrate both the engineering knowledge that we're talking about here, but with design knowledge, with the question of how you put this in front of customers. So let's talk about how you put this in front of customers. Shift left is a principle. Yeah, sorry, Cor, go ahead.
I just want to add to the previous principle. I refer to as doing cool shit. So just doing stuff for doing stuff. Can you
a little closer?
I refer to it as doing cool shit. Just do stuff for the sake of doing. You learn something out of it. It might not have practical, it might be practical to yourself and not scalable or not anything, but just doing it to learn something because it's fun.
Okay, I'm gonna. Excellent. That's a really good point. I think that gets to the point of experimentation, right? And just being willing to try things. We talked about that a little bit before, and we're going to find that kind of runs as a theme all the way through. And being willing to try things that don't work and say, when it doesn't work, or that's interesting, is going to be how it helps us promote our growth, both of our projects and of ourselves. So all of this, we talked about speed, right? I talked about no-code being in the service of speed. Shift left is an idea that comes from it comes from a few things, but I learned it in the context of what's called DevOps, which is an idea of managing. We talked about observability before. How to be putting products into the market sooner and being able to put management concerns into the project sooner. You have a timeline, right? It goes from left to the right. And on the left-hand side is now, on the right-hand side is the distant future. And the idea is the sooner we can ship, the better. So how can we have a bias towards shipping sooner? But shipping what? I think a lot of folks get tied up in the idea of trying to ship the big thing, right? We say MVP, but it's not that minimal, right? There's a whole lot of moving parts to it. But there's a lot that we can ship in the middle that can really matter and allow us to turn the wheel faster in terms of both product knowledge, but also in terms of market knowledge. One of the things that Jack, you were discussing, I think is actually really important, is the idea of documentation. Over at Amazon, Jeff Bezos put in a rule that in order for them to start an initiative, they need to start with the press release of what the project of the announcement of that product or initiative they're doing. Before you do anything. Now, I'm not saying there's anything you should do before you do absolutely anything, but it does fall in the category of something that's easier to do at the beginning, right? So you can be imagining and being able to use a Stephen Covey line, begin with the end in mind. And the more you're able to do, that's a linear thing, the more you're able to do that, the better off you're going to be. So being able to ship something like, even documentation about what this thing is likely to be. And that documentation, keep in mind, that's the previous thing, we're going to build it again, right? So we're not trying to build a thing that's going to last forever. But it gives us something we can give to our colleagues, it gives us something we can give to our customers, or even just for your own eyeballs. Because having an artifact can make a tremendous difference. Can I quickly ask, in fact, Core, I'm going to call on you again for this one, because you were talking about building cool stuff, and how it is you've approached that idea of creating artifacts early in your process. Stuff that you've built that was cool.
I guess before I'm trying to force myself before I just go into building, just to put something on Miro, or
Okay.
just put a mind map down to see where I'm heading before I get going.
Sure, creating a bit of a mind map. All right. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead. And then you.
Thanks. Sometimes I try to use a tool that won't be my final tool, just to test the ID and ship it to the customer first. Even if there wasn't like the right features and stuff in the tool, but just first version to get the early adopters, even if I shift after.
A rougher prototype.
Yeah.
Yep. Rakas, and then up here to Bill.
Yeah. Building proof of concepts of the hardest part first, usually.
I like building the hardest part first. Jack?
Writing tests before you actually build anything, so you have acceptance criteria.
Yep, TDD, absolutely. You were going to do TDD? All right. Okay. No, yeah. TDD, by the way, is called test-driven development. It's the idea of having your specification of how it's supposed to work. This is something that is much more popular in more pro-code type environments, because you do it at the level of what they call unit testing. One of the tricky things about a lot of the no-code tools, they don't lend themselves to either unit or integration testing. You wind up with more end-to-end testing. And actually, there was an N-scale presentation earlier that was very on point for that. But I found that to be pretty helpful as well. So the idea is you don't need to ship everything at the beginning, right? You can be shipping a written piece. You can be shipping a technical prototype. You can be shipping a small version of the product. You can be shipping one of the features. But when you get in the habit of doing that on a rapid basis, I find that allows you to move much, much quicker. Okay. The final thing, and this will be the final thing, is the idea of just get started. And Daniel, I think there's a particular expression that you've always been a little bit more fond of. Could we give Daniel the microphone to give him a... Thank you so much, Jack.
Are you talking about the 1-2 rule?
I'm talking about the 1-2.
Okay. Yeah, so this is something I've learned from Ray that really helped me. And basically what it is that you just give yourself 1 hour, and then you reassess after that hour. And if it's going well, stick with it, give yourself another hour. If it's not, pivot, find something else, do it some other way, test another hour somewhere else.
Yep. The reason I call it the 1-2 approach is that no matter what, after 2, you raise your head from it and ask, okay, what's next, right? You don't allow it to be a thing that's going to suck you in for days and days. One of the things about using no-code tools that's also kind of true for a lot of the more low-codey stuff that's out there is that it doesn't need to be that, it shouldn't be taking weeks to do a thing. If you're using the tool well, it should be taking more like hours per piece. So that if you find that you're doing it for days, there's that should be a signal of trouble. I find this to be just a super helpful idea that momentum really matters when we're building. When we're using these tools, it can be easy to get stuck on something. And so getting unstuck relatively quickly, either pivoting because you're stopping at the 1, or looking up to see how it fits in with the rest, right? Because we are not composers of clay, we are assemblers of Legos. And when we take that point of view, I find it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to continue, keep moving, maintain our momentum, and be able to ship the things that we really find to be valuable. Can I quickly ask the rest of the room, do you have any other tips for your colleagues here for what you do when you're feeling stuck, right? Or things that will allow you to move to keep that momentum going? Bailey?
To add on to the 1-2 rule, I didn't actually know of it be called the 1-2 rule before. But when I was first developing in Xano, I realized that the most times I got unstuck was when I wasn't developing in Xano, meaning when I was taking a break or making myself lunch or even just like about to go to sleep, sometimes literally in my dreams, I will dream about my Xano function, and I'll have an aha moment of this is why it's not working.
Yeah.
And I'll like wake up at 3 a.m. and write a note down of to remember it, and then I wake up in the morning and implement it, and it works.
Yeah.
So to add on to the 1-2 rule, it's let the problem percolate, and just give yourself a break to step back and look at the bigger picture of the problem. Allows you to understand it more deeper, in my opinion.
I do want to add on to that. I've found that most of the time, because I'm in Ray's group, and I found even with other members, we end up, he requires us most of the time to create a loom about our problem so he can do some homework and, be able to help us. But I'd say 50% of the time when we go and we, think about our problem and communicate it and record the loom, we solve our own problem.
I think that's a great technique. If you have that, even if you just do that for yourself, that can make a lot of difference. If you have someone else, like an accountability partner, someone you can be showing that with, I find that can make a big difference too. And these are all things you can do relatively quickly, right? I'm not saying go write a book about it, but recording a 3-minute loom is actually really quick. And the really cool thing about looms, I find, is that they actually made up of a whole bunch of images, so that when you show it to yourself or show it to someone else, you can freeze frame it. You're going to find there's 3 seconds that are really important in there. And that by having recorded it in 3 minutes, you're able to look back and understand more about how, what is really sticking you. And this allows you to make a lot more progress a lot faster. So we try to ship faster. We try to, learn. And this all forms a wheel, right? So you have the beginner's mind. You're saying, I'm going to permit myself to build something small and be working on the hard things. I'm going to be saying that I need to ship knowledge. That means I need to go get some knowledge, right? And that knowledge is going to become, because I'm curious, I'm giving myself permission to learn things. I don't need to know everything today. Because I am curious, because I'm bringing new information, I'm not going to get stuck and start going into analysis paralysis or doing like infinite research. I know that my job is to ship. The whole reason I'm using no code is I want to go fast. I'm going to shift left on my timeline. I'm going to bring more artifacts to myself, to my colleagues, to my customers that I can put in front of them, so I can gain not only technical knowledge, but also the market knowledge. And that's the difference between just being an engineer and being a product person. And I think the difference between being what we might call a pro coder and the mental model and the attitude that I find to be most beneficial for no coders. And when in doubt, just do something. One of the things I have found about the 1-2 is it gives wonderful permission. Because you're like, what's the thing I should do next? I've got this huge list. Doesn't matter. You pick one thing. It's only an hour. You should be willing to invest an hour in the fact that it wasn't quite the right thing, but it gave you some momentum. That's going to be its value. That allows us to keep moving, to have speed, and to be able to ship and be able to succeed in actually getting through the toughest 5%. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate getting to do this with you all today. And anyone who wants to talk more about the toughest 5%, I'm glad to do it up here.